Hello and welcome, folks. Thanks for spending your time with us. Just letting some folks in still. But I did want to open up by thanking you for attending today's Transgender and Gender Diverse Day of Remembrance. This is being hosted by Clackamas County's Queers and Allies Employee Resource Group. My name is Kelly. I go by she, her, they, them pronouns, and I'm one of the co-founders of the group and one of the current co-chairs of the group. To start off today, it's really important to us as a planning group, as well as Q&A as a larger group, to do a land acknowledgement. So I will pass this off to Tracy Moreland, who has graciously offered to do a land acknowledgement. Tracy.
Thank you. What we now call Clackamas County is the traditional lands and waterways of the Clackamas Chinook bands, Kalapuya, Cathamet, Molalla, Multnomah, Tualatin, Tumwater, Wasco, and many other tribes of the Willamette Valley and Western Oregon. We will never be able to name every tribe that visited or lived upon this land because these communities frequently traveled for trade or other reasons. The indigenous people lived, traded, and navigated along our great rivers and tributaries, presently named the Clackamas, Molalla, Pudding, Sandy, and Willamette. Many of the original inhabitants of this land died from disease, war, and other conflicts. Those that survived these tragedies were forcibly removed and relocated by European settlers and the United States government because of the land's value. Today, their descendants live on, still carrying on the traditions and cultures of their ancestors. We honor the Native American people of Clackamas County as a vibrant, foundational, and integral part of our community here today. We respectfully acknowledge Wai'east, also known as Mount Hood, and Hayas Hayu Tumwater, also known as Willamette Falls, as its sacred sites for many Native Americans. We thank those who have connection to this land and serve as stewards, working to ensure our ecosystem stays balanced and healthy. Acknowledging the original people of the land is simple, and it's a powerful practice that demonstrates respect by making Indigenous people's history and culture visible. It is also a small step along the path toward reconciliation and repair. Please take this opportunity to thank and honor the original caretakers of this land. Hayumasi, many thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. We really appreciate you being here with us and sharing that and all of the work that you've put in. Sorry. Today, the Clackamas County Queers and Allies Employee Resource Group is honored to bring you this online Transgender and Gender Diverse Day of Remembrance event. My name is Kelly, and I use she, her, they, them pronouns. I was a co-founder and I'm one of the current co-chairs of the ERG. This year, many trans-led TDOR, you'll hear that a lot today, Trans Day of Remembrance initiatives are expanding to a model that recognizes both the losses and the resiliency of the trans and gender diverse community. In that spirit, our planning committee worked hard this year to create an event that is accessible, genuine, and transformative in nature. Between October 1st, 2020 and September 30th, 2021, 70 trans and gender diverse lives were lost in the United States. Many were murdered, some died by suicide, and a few passed from COVID-19. You may hear names that are familiar to you, and you may learn of the death of someone you knew. We honor them all. As we recognize these beautiful humans today, I have a few asks of you. I ask you to notice how many are trans people of color, and specifically trans women of color. I hope that you'll notice that most of their murderers are still unknown and their death investigations are unresolved. So my challenge to you today is this: recognize and remember the discomfort you feel today and let it fuel action and advocacy, and try to avoid sadness and stuckness. Our amazing resolution services staff will be holding space after this event for anyone who might need or want some support, and I encourage folks to consider attending. Excuse me. Before we start honoring the people we've lost this year, let me define two important words that you'll hear today, and you may already be very familiar with. Dead naming is the first one, and that is the use of the birth or other former name of a transgender or non-binary person without the person's consent. Dead naming may be accidental or used intentionally to dismiss, deny, or reject a person's gender identity. Misgendering is the other word, which is the act of referring to someone using a word, especially a pronoun or a form of address that does not correctly reflect the gender with which they identify. In closing, I'd like to share a quote said so much better than I could format, I'm sure. And it's from TDOR's founder, Gwendolyn Ann Smith. Sorry. Okay. Transgender Day of Remembrance seeks to highlight the losses we face due to anti-transgender bigotry and violence. I am no stranger to the need to fight for our rights, and the right to simply exist is first and foremost. With so many seeking to erase transgender people, sometimes in the most brutal ways possible, it is vitally important that those we lose are remembered and that we continue to fight for justice. Thank you everyone for being here. And I will pass it off to Gary to read the first name.
Felicia Harris. Felicia was a 33-year-old woman who lived in Augusta, Georgia. She owned and ran her own interior design business and taught dance in her community. Felicia was found near an elementary school playground on October 3, 2020, after being shot to death. Her death has been classified as a homicide, but no motive or suspect has been identified by law enforcement.
Brooklyn Brooke Deshauna Smith. Brooke was a funny, brave, and positive 20-year-old woman who lived in Shreveport, Louisiana. She was studying cosmetology and at her local community college while also working at a call center. Brooke was shot to death on October 7th, 2020. Some media dead named her in the coverage of her death, and most details of the investigation into her death are still unknown.
Sarah Blackwood. Sarah was a 29-year-old woman who lived in Indianapolis, who was described as a sweet person and a good friend. Sarah was shot and killed while walking home from work on October 11th, 2020. A friend was quoted in saying, the world at large is now missing a very kind, responsible person. A suspect was arrested for her murder about a month after she died.
Angel Haynes, also known as Angel Unique. Angel was a 25-year-old woman who lived in Jackson, Tennessee. She worked as a cosmetologist and was described by friends and family as very funny and very nice to everyone she met. On October 25th, 2020, Angel was shot and killed in Memphis. Her family and community believe she was murdered for being transgender. No suspects have been identified or arrested.
Skylar Heath. Skylar was a 20-year-old woman who lived in Liberty City, Florida. She was described by friends as a kind and gentle soul who had massive amounts of love for her family and close friends. Not much is known about the circumstances of her death, but her friends report that she was shot. Her family held a service for her on November 20th, 2020, which happens to be the Trans Day of Remembrance, where she was dead named and misgendered while being laid to rest.
Fendi, Moniza, Armstrong, Peaches. Peaches was a 39-year-old aspiring motivational health and beauty advisor who lived in Decatur, Georgia. Her body was found in a motel room on November 12, 2020, after being shot. Peaches was frequently dead-named and misgendered in documents related to her death. There was little coverage of her death by the media. No suspects have been identified or arrested.
Yuneski Carrie Herrera, Uni. Uni was a 34-year-old activist, role model, and pageant queen who lived in Miami and loved to salsa dance. On November 17, 2020, Uni was stabbed to death by her husband in their home, and after she attempted to end the relationship. Her community is mourning the loss of someone they described as resilient, beautiful, and jovial. Her husband was arrested for her murder.
Asia Janae Foster. Asia was a 22-year-old woman who lived in Houston, Texas. She worked a local business, was involved in Job Corps, and participated in local trans-friendly homeless services when needed. Asia enjoyed racing-themed video games and was a vibrant part of her community. On November 20th, 2020, she was shot to death. Police have no leads in her murder, which sadly occurred on Trans Day of Remembrance, 2020.
Kimberly Susan Kyle. Kimberly was a 55-year-old woman who lived in San Jose, California. Kimberly had a quiet temperament, but could easily make others laugh. She loved bright colors, and after utilizing services there herself, she became a volunteer at a local homeless shelter. On November 22nd, 2020, Kimberly was stabbed to death while volunteering at the shelter, along with other victims. A suspect was arrested later that day.
Shamicia Sims, Shay Shay. Shay Shay was a 30-year-old woman who lived in Richmond, Virginia. She loved her family and friends fiercely and was described as good, kind, and caring. Shay Shay was shot and killed on November 30th, 2020, in her mother's rental car. Police have not released a motive or circumstances of her death. Shay Shay's father and community have vowed they will never stop looking for a reason for this tragedy.
Mylia Mullen. Mylia was described as a source of light and openness for everyone. She died by suicide December 20th, 2021. Her family believed it was possibly due to depression, and that was compounded by the pandemic. Mylia's mother urged people to get closer to their families and loved ones because tomorrow is never promised.
Courtney Ishay Key. Courtney was a 25-year-old woman found unresponsive on the side of the street after being shot on Christmas Day 2020. She died at the scene. She was chosen family to many in her community. Her family remembers her as someone who is outgoing, funny, and determined. The police have continued to misgender and dead name her since her death.
Alexandria Winchester. Alexandria was a 24-year-old woman who lived in New York City. She was shot and killed in the street on December 26, 2020. The crime was caught on video and her murderer has been arrested.
Kimberly Kim Patricia Cope. Kimberly was a 40-year-old woman living in Athens, Georgia, who loved pets and had a dog named Chance. On December 27th, 2020, her body was found in the parking lot of a restaurant a few blocks from her home, and her death is considered suspicious. Her obituary noted that as an adult, Kim came into her own by combining her talents and passions. She was a gifted makeup artist, a self-trained hairstylist, had an eye for presentation, and an extraordinary sense of style. Law enforcement, media, and family members misgendered her in some spaces, but used her accurate gender language in other spaces, such as her obituary.
Bonnie Black. Bonnie Black was an 18-year-old woman who lived in Atlanta, Georgia. Bonnie was unhoused, but was actively seeking employment and housing at the time of her death. Those who knew her described her as an artist, songwriter, and rapper. They noted that even when facing difficult circumstances, Bonnie tried to help others in need. Bonnie's body was found lying under a blanket on the 3rd floor of a parking garage on December 31st, 2020. Atlanta police said there were no signs of foul play, but people who knew her claimed that she was killed during an argument. Bonnie died just 7 days before her 19th birthday.
Tayana Alexander. Tayana was a 28-year-old woman who lived in Chicago, Illinois. But there are no details released about Tayana's life, but she was clearly a beautiful and vibrant presence. On January 6, 2021, Tayana was one of 2 people shot and killed by a gunman firing from a vehicle. Her death marked the second murder of a trans woman in Chicago in the first 6 days of 2021. The Chicago police originally misgendered Tayana in addressing her death, but the LGBTQ+ community came forward to address her misgendering and to support her family with funeral costs.
Samuel Edmund Damian Valentine. Samuel was a 21-year-old college student who lived in Puerto Rico. On January 1st, Samuel wrote on his Facebook, "A new year to come, grateful for all the experiences who taught me how strong we really are, to life, to good and bad, and for all, justice that is forth to come." His body was discovered in Trujillo Alto, Puerto Rico on January 9th, 2021 on the PR 181 highway with multiple gunshot wounds. Samuel was misgendered by authorities after death, leading to delays in identification. Local activists are urging authorities to investigate his murder as a hate crime. His case remains unsolved.
Natasha Kiana. Natasha Kiana was a 37-year-old woman from Detroit, Michigan. Her mother said she was a beautiful person. She was loved all over. Natasha's body was found inside her car on January 12th, 2021. She had just been seen alive on December 29th and was reported missing January 6th. Police reported no signs of trauma, but members of her family suspect foul play. Her cause of death has not been reported.
Bianca Muffin Banks. Bianca was a 30-year-old woman who lived in Atlanta, Georgia. Bianca had recently moved into her own apartment after a period of homelessness and hoped to one day compete on RuPaul's Drag Race. Those who knew her described her as a sweet and kind person who was just blossoming into herself. Bianca appears to have been the victim of a murder-suicide in her own home on January 17th, 2021.
Dominique Jackson. Dominique was a 30-year-old woman who lived in New Orleans. She was a trans organizer who was well known and well loved by her community. Dominique co-founded a queer youth program whose motto is fighting the criminalization of LGBTQ youth. On January 25th, 2021, Dominique was found suffering from a gunshot wound after her vehicle crashed into a utility pole. She was dead named and misgendered by police and in news reports. No suspect or motive have been released in her death.
Sandy Chris, Goddess Bunny. Sandy was a 61-year-old woman who lived in Los Angeles, California. Sandy was an actress who appeared in well-known music videos and movies and was chosen family to many in her community. Sandy was described as someone who truly didn't care what others thought of her and was a joy to know. Sandy bravely battled HIV and polio throughout her life, and on January 27, 2021, Sandy died of COVID in Los Angeles.
"50 bands." 50 was a 21-year-old woman who lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. 50 loved to dance and laugh. She was described by friends as self-aware and intelligent. 50 was the victim of ongoing domestic violence in her romantic relationship. On January 28, 2021, 50 was shot and killed by her very volatile boyfriend during an argument. While her killer has been arrested, 50 was dead named and misgendered by media and law enforcement.
Alexis Kimmy Icon Braxton was a Black trans woman and beloved daughter who lived in Miami. She was known by family and friends as a talented hairstylist and to be as real as they get. Kimmy Icon was found dead on February 4th, 2021 in her own home. The case is being investigated as a violent homicide, but the cause of death has not been released.
Alexander Blake Van Dalsen. Alexander Blake Van Dalsen was found dead on February 9th, 2021 in Lafayette, Indiana, after being missing for 6 days. Press did not misgender Alexander, but very little information was provided. They worked as an inspector at Toyota Shoe Show America. No cause of death was disclosed.
China Carrillo. China died on February 18th, 2021 in hospital after being attacked in the backyard of a residential building in February. Police who were called to the scene shot dead her attacker, who had recently been released from prison for shooting his wife. China was described by her aunt as my lovely magical mermaid, one of my favorite people in the world. I will miss everything about her.
Jasmine Bright Jazzy. Jasmine Jazzy Bright identified as non-binary and lived with their family in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. Jazzy and their non-binary sibling were involved in the local queer community and were described as happy. On February 21, 2021, Jasmine and their non-binary sibling JJ were both shot dead by their mother in the family home. Jazzy's murderer has been arrested and charged with 2 counts of homicide.
Jeffrey Bright, JJ. Jeffrey JJ Bright identified as non-binary and lived with their family in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. JJ and their non-binary sibling were involved in a local queer community and were described as happy. On February 21st, 2021, JJ and their non-binary sibling were both shot dead at their mother by their mother in the family home. JJ's murderer has been arrested and charged with 2 counts of homicide.
Jenna Franks. Jenna was a 34-year-old woman who lived in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Jenna was an active part of the local LGBTQ+ community and was described as a beautiful soul and a breath of fresh air. Jenna was murdered on February 24th, 2021 and her body was later found in a ditch next to the creek by city workers. She was dead-named and misgendered in most coverage of her life and death. No suspect, motive, cause of death, or leads have been released.
Kimberly Wurtz, Tova. Kimberly was a 43-year-old woman who lived in Baltimore, Maryland. For years, she tried to assimilate into a society that wasn't built for her. On February 26, 2021, Kimberly was discovered unresponsive in a male cell in a prison in Baltimore where she was wrongfully held. She was transported to a hospital where she was pronounced dead. The authorities have not released the cause of death to her family.
Diamond Kyrie Sanders, Diamond Nicole. Also known as Diamond Nicole, Diamond Kyrie Sanders was a 23-year-old woman who lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. Diamond loved to travel, adored her family, and enjoyed fashion. On March 3rd, 2021, she was found shot to death in the parking lot of an apartment building. Law enforcement reported that she was the victim of robbery as well.
Brianna Pardo. Brianna was a 26-year-old woman who lived in Los Angeles, California. She was a beautiful young person who just wanted to live her life and be herself. On March 17th, 2021, Brianna was killed by a drunk driver as she fled from harassers. Her family continues to advocate for a complete investigation into her death. Unfortunately, Brianna was largely dead-named and misgendered by media and family following her death.
Adeline Evans. Adeline was a 24-year-old woman from Port Arthur, Texas. She was a part of the local homeless community. Adeline was found deceased in a canal on March 18th, 2021, but due to officials using her dead name and misgendering her, her community was unaware of her passing for a full week. The cause of her death has yet to be determined.
Piper Autumn Rivers, Tegan Toxic. Tegan was a 35-year-old woman who lived in Las Vegas in recent years. She had many friends and was described as very sweet. Tegan was a disabled veteran of the Army, having served in Afghanistan. She was an active part of the trans community and enjoyed creating. Tegan completed suicide on March 22nd, 2021. She is greatly missed by her partner, family, and friends.
Chris Brandon Ruiz. Chris was 26 years old at the time of his death on March 28, 2021. After years of struggling with mental health and bravely fighting other health issues, Chris was shot by police in Lompoc, California. An investigation into his death is still underway. Chris was a lover of music and dogs. His passion for music bonded him with many, and he will be missed by lifelong friends and family.
Kim Ramirez. Kim was a 20 to 25-year-old woman who lived in New York City. Unfortunately, not much is known about her life. On March 28, 2021, Kim was found in an unresponsive condition in a bus shelter in New York City. No suspect, motive, or cause of death has been released. She was dead-named and misgendered by police and media.
Jada Peterson. Jada was a 29-year-old woman who lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. She was always full of life and could turn a sad face into a happy face. On April 4th, 2021, Jada was shot to death at a hotel in Charlotte by 2 men. These men were later arrested and charged with multiple murders of trans women in the area. Although corrected later, police and media initially dead-named and misgendered Jada.
Dominique Luscious. Dominique was a 26-year-old woman who lived in Springfield, Missouri. She was a fan of the TV show Empire and was described by friends as fierce, glam, and honey gorgeous. On April 8th, 2021, she was shot to death by a man who was arrested later that day for her murder. A motive for the shooting is still unclear. Coverage of her death used both her name and dead name.
Remy Fennel. Remy was an intelligent, innovative, fashionable 28-year-old woman who lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. With a passion to style hair, she hoped to own a salon someday. On April 15th, 2021, she was shot dead by 2 men who were also responsible for another murder. It is unclear if her death will be classified as a hate crime. She was dead named in some documents and events after her death.
Tiara Banks. Tiara was a 24-year-old woman who lived in Chicago, Illinois. Little is known about Tiara's life. On April 21st, 2021, she was shot to death while sitting alone in her car. Chicago police are investigating whether Tiara's gender identity was a factor in her death. She was mourned by community and national organizations alike.
Iris Santos. Iris was a 22-year-old woman who lived in Houston, Texas. Iris was always full of life and joy and was passionate about helping people. While she was sitting outside a Chick-fil-A restaurant on April 23rd, 2021, someone approached and shot her. She was rushed to the hospital where she later died. Police released surveillance video, but no one has been arrested or charged for Iris's murder.
Natalia Lopez. Natalia was a 22-year-old firecracker drag performer, a proud Afro-Rican, and a dazzling lip sync artist with star power. She was a passionate advocate within the community who mentored, motivated, and used her creativity to help and inspire many. Natalia was shot and killed by a man she was dating on April 23rd in San Jose, California.
Tiffany Thomas. Tiffany Thomas was a 38-year-old woman who lived in Dallas, Texas. She was shot to death at a car wash in Dallas on April 24th, 2021. Initial reports identifying Tiffany as transgender were removed and reporting on her death delayed when her biological family denied that Tiffany was transgender. Her family refused to identify her body as female. They misgendered and dead named her. Not much else is known about Tiffany, but we honor her for bravely living her truth.
Carrie Bobo Washington. Carrie was a 49-year-old woman who lived in Clearwater, Florida. She called herself the Diva of Fiva and the Queen of Slay, both descriptions that were echoed by her friends after her murder on May 1st, 2021. Carrie was a caregiver for her mother. She was wry, funny, introspective, and intelligent. Carrie died of blunt force trauma to her upper body inflicted by her domestic partner. Many reports misgendered her and used a different spelling of her first name.
Jahida de Alto Valenciaga. Jahida was a 42-year-old woman from Boston, Massachusetts. Jahida was an activist who advocated for equality and for victims of abuse. She was an active member of the ballroom dance community as well. Jahida spoke up and out for many and will be missed by many. She and her friend Fatima were both stabbed and killed by Fatima's husband on May 2nd, 2021.
T. Hardin. T. Hardin was a 35-year-old woman from York, South Carolina, who was shot and killed on May 2nd, 2021. After a week-long manhunt, her suspected murderer was arrested after fleeing the area and committing several other violent crimes. When news coverage and law enforcement actually spoke of T's case, they dead-named and misgendered her. Her murderer's police chase received far more publicity than her murder.
Whispering Wind, Bear Spirit. Bear Spirit was a 41-year-old non-binary person living in York, Pennsylvania. Bear Spirit was a generous and reflective person. Bear Spirit identified as Shawnee by birth and Potawatomi by relations. Not much else is known about their life. Bear Spirit was shot and killed on May 3rd in their home during a home invasion. They died trying to protect their housemates from attack.
Danny Henson also went by Prince Daniel. Danny Henson was a 31-year-old woman from Baltimore, Maryland. She had just begun to transition and was described as the embodiment of love by her friends. Danny attended the University of Maryland. The day before her murder, she posted, "Please pray for me," on her Facebook page. Danny was shot and killed on May 4th, 2021. While her killers have been arrested and are currently awaiting trial, her family is still searching for answers and a motive.
Sophie Vasquez. Sophie Vasquez was a 36-year-old woman from Brookhaven, Georgia. Sophie was part of the Estrella community, or the community Estrella, a community that works to support transgender people in the Atlanta area, and friends described her as the kindest person on the planet. Sophie was shot and killed on May 4th, 2021. Following her death, she was dead-named and misgendered by police. Her killer was arrested and is awaiting trial.
Danielle Danny Bochi. Danny was a 33-year-old from Chicago, Illinois, and used they, them pronouns. Danny was an activist who, under the name Mistress Velvet, was known as a dominatrix who made their clients read Black feminist theory. They had a master's degree in women and gender studies and were an advocate for sex workers and survivors of sexual violence. Danny completed suicide on May 8, 2021.
Serenity Hollis. Serenity was a 24-year-old woman who lived in Alberta, Georgia. She was well liked in her community and had recently started a new job. 2 years ago, she was stabbed and survived that attack. On May 8, 2021, she was shot in the head and died from her wounds. Serenity's murder is being considered a hate crime, but no suspects have been announced or arrested. She has been dead-named and misgendered by police, DA, media, and by her own family.
Nona Moselle Connor. Nona was a 37-year-old woman who lived in Washington, D.C. Being a survivor of homelessness, domestic violence, and sexual assault, she fought for the rights of sex workers, women of color, and transgender women. She reminded people to be blessed and a blessing. She unexpectedly passed away on May 30th, 2021. No cause of death has been released, but no foul play is suspected.
Giselle Hardin.
Giselle Hilton. Giselle was a 30-year-old woman who lived in Washington, D.C., originally from Mississippi. Giselle navigated poverty and homelessness in the D.C. area. With assistance from a local LGBTQ community services center, she'd been notified that the city's supported housing was about to become available to her. Giselle died on May 18th, 2021. No cause of death has been released, but no foul play is suspected.
Oliver Ollie Taylor. Oliver was a 17-year-old man who lived in Jervis, Oregon. He loved animals, music, and art, and was an active member of the Jervis Future Farmers of America program. People described him as creative and mischievous, caring and generous. On May 12, 2021, an acquaintance kidnapped and shot Oliver. He died at a hospital a week later.
Haven A. Bailey. Haven was a 25-year-old man who lived in Villa Park, Illinois. He was a person who found peace in spending time fishing. He was an avid Pokemon trainer and a Tim Burton fan. On May 24th, 2021, Haven was shot dead by police in what appears to have been suicide by cop incident. He was misgendered in a police statement on Facebook.
Poe Black, Oliver Jackson, Legion, Tommy. Poe was a 21-year-old two-spirit indigenous person who recently moved to Slabs City, California to fulfill their wish to live off-grid and feel freedom. Poe was a talented visual artist and activist. On May 11th, 2021, Poe's body was found in a canal after being sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Police are investigating Poe's death as a homicide, but no motive or suspect have been released.
Casey Wilson. Casey was a 26-year-old woman who lived in the Washington, D.C. area. Not much is known about her life. She was murdered on May 30th, 2021, and it has been reported that D.C. police never informed the community of her death. Details of her death are unknown at this time, and no motive or suspects have been identified.
Dee Dee Thomas. Dee Dee was a 42-year-old woman who lived in New York City. She was described by family as happy, beautiful, a sweet soul, and an incredible storyteller. She was a proud trans woman who loved to dance and do hair and makeup. On June 6th, her decomposing body was found in a dumpster by a community member. Her family is devastated by her death and how her body was senselessly discarded. Dee Dee's death is being considered suspicious, but no leads or suspects have been identified.
Tiara Marie Lewis. Tiara Marie was a 36-year-old woman who lived in Cleveland, Ohio. She was a spirited woman and a bright light in her community. While her life had been hard, she was filled with kindness and a desire for change. Tiara Marie was shot and killed on June 12th in Cleveland. Despite her legal name and gender marker changes with the state, her death was unknown to her community and friends for over a month due to the police, medical examiner, family, and the funeral home misgendering and dead naming her. On June 28th, a suspect was arrested for her murder, and motive is still unknown.
Nova E.J. Rue Watson. Nova was a 23-year-old man who lived in Virginia. Nova was described by friends as a beautiful spirit with an amazing heart. Nova was a rapper that was just good vibes and energy. Nova was shot and killed in Lynchburg, Virginia on June 14th, 2021. A child was with him at the time, but was not physically wounded. While the family and law enforcement have used his name, the media continues to dead name and misgender him. Nova's death remains unsolved.
Ruby Dominguez. Ruby was a 29-year-old woman who was killed by a hit-and-run driver on July 16, 2021 in Arlington, Texas. Her family, authorities, and media misgendered and dead-named her in her obituary and reports of her death. Police have released the make and model of the vehicle that hit her, but have no other leads. No other information is available about her life.
Taya Ashton. Taya was a 20-year-old woman whose family describes her as a bright presence and beautiful soul. She was known for her entrepreneurial spirit and her compassion. She was working to open a clothing boutique and regularly did fundraising and attended vigils for others in her community, even when she had not known them. Taya was shot in her own home in Suitland, Maryland on July 20th, 2021. A man she had been in an intimate relationship with has been charged with her murder.
Jessica Smith. Jessica Smith was a vibrant 23-year-old woman with a big heart and contagious energy. She volunteered frequently at her local LGBTQ+ center, where she was described as happy, full of life, and authentic. Jessica was found unresponsive in the parking lot of a local laundromat in Lodi, California on July 18th, 2021. Media did not report her death, and authorities classified it as an overdose. She had been the victim of multiple hate crimes.
Shea Vanderpump. Shea Vanderpump was a 23-year-old woman who was known as a fierce LGBTQ advocate in Trenton, New Jersey. Shea was known for her smile, her style, her love of family, and for living as herself. Shea was shot in the face while protecting a loved one on August 30th, 2021. Police arrested a man for her murder the next day. It is unclear whether Shea used her birth name and masculine pronouns in life, along with her chosen name. Friends, family, authorities, and media identified Shea as a trans woman and used both names and pronouns.
Coco Chanel, Miss Coco Wortham. Miss Coco was a 44-year-old homeless resident of Dallas, Texas. Miss Coco was a well-known small girl with a big, bubbly personality, happy and proud to be living her truth. She was shot at a homeless camp on August 7th, 2021. Police are investigating her murder as a hate crime until evidence proves it to be otherwise.
Pooh Johnson, also known as Titanizer Meow. Pooh was a 25-year-old makeup artist and businesswoman who enjoyed making people feel glamorous and good about themselves. Pooh was shot multiple times in her car in Shreveport, Louisiana on August 23, 2021. Her family and the funeral home used her dead name and male pronouns during her services. There is no information about the investigation into her murder.
Claire Montserrat Jackson. Claire was a 45-year-old writer, novelist, poet, and illustrator who lived to entertain others. She died in her home in Troy, Ohio on August 27, 2021, of complications due to COVID-19. Claire was vaccinated and was an advocate for responsible vaccination and masking practices. She contracted the virus from her beloved 7-year-old niece, Booba, on August 19, 2021. After Booba was exposed at a school that did not require masking or distancing.
Zoella Rose Martinez, Zoe. Zoe was witty, curious, and generous 20-year-old woman who loved hanging out with her friends and spending time with her dog. Zoe had a beautiful spirit. She always had a smile and had only kind words to say about others. She was kidnapped on August 31st, 2021, and her body was found with multiple gunshot wounds the next day. A suspect in her murder was arrested on September 6, 2021.
Desire Monet Smith. Desire was a happy, outgoing, and well-loved 27-year-old woman who lived in Chicago. She was a hairstylist who loved family above all. Desire spoke to her mother on the phone every day, including just before her murder. She was found in a hotel room with multiple gunshot wounds. There were signs of a struggle, indicating she fought her attacker. Some media misgendered and dead-named her in the coverage of her death, and most details of the investigation into her death are still unknown.
Brianna Ulmer, Brianna Hamilton. Brianna was a 25-year-old woman who lived in Chicago. She had a magnetic personality, and her sister described her as always full of life and was honest, loyal, and authentic. Brianna wanted to be a makeup artist. She loved amusement parks, classic scary movies, and music. Brianna was shot in the head on the street in the early hours of September 17th, 2021. Some media dead-named and misgendered her in the coverage of her death, and police have no leads or suspects.
Kier Laprie Cartier. Kier was a 21-year-old woman who lived with her grandmother in Dallas, Texas. She was found shot to death in her car on September 30th, 2021. Kier was described as a ball of joy. Her mother said, Kier was very loved and loved a lot of people. There was no reason for this to have happened. Some media misgendered and dead-named her. Police say they have no solid leads in her murder.
It is now my honor to introduce Sister Inda Beginning, who will lead us in a closing blessing. Sister Inda uses they, them pronouns and is the mistress of novices of the Portland Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. They teach new nuns all about the order and how to uplift and advocate for our community, raise funds, and raise fun. Sister Inda is honored to share this special space with all of you today.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you everybody for sharing the space with us here today and letting us join you. As Erin just said, we are the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, and it is part of our duty to make sure that events like these for Trans Day of Remembrance are a safe space for everybody to be involved. And I really appreciate the energy and effort that's been put into creating this space. This has been an emotional afternoon for everybody, and I think we can all feel that. And I want to acknowledge that within the space, that doesn't just go away as soon as we log off. It has been an emotional afternoon, and for some of us, this is a practice. Every tea door, we come together and we practice grieving in a world that tells us we should just move on to the next thing, to the next distraction. Yes, and we come together to practice sharing the bright lives of these individuals. Yes, and we practice learning more, learning new things about other folks that we might not have come across in our daily lives. Yes, and we have difficult conversations. We have difficult ideas presented, and we learn and practice to share those with each other. And I challenge everybody to, as part of this blessing, to extend that blessing beyond this space. We've learned a lot about folks who have had to fight much harder than they needed to, and paid a bigger price than was necessary just to exist. And so, in a bit of a role reversal, I'm blessing everybody here with the power of the sisters to extend that blessing to others, to continue this practice of learning more about the folks around you and celebrating their lives while they're still with us. And so in any way that you can remind yourself to do that, whether it's a Post-it note, whether it's a message that you have on your phone, I challenge you to move forward from this space and carry that blessing with you so that you can share it with all the people in your lives. And maybe some new folks that you haven't gotten to know yet. So thank you again for inviting us into the space, and I bless you to bless others.
I want to say thank you so much to Sister Inda, to all of our panelists, to all of our attendees, and to all of the families and loved ones of those we honor today. We will be closing this space in a moment. There will be a supportive listening space open that will open immediately after. We will be admitting people into that space for the next 10 minutes, so until 1:40 p.m. After that time, we will lock that space for further admissions to create a safe container. And we will be open to hearing your sharing, your impacts, what you want to share, if anything, about how you're feeling at the end of this ceremony. Thank you very much for being with us.